Hi guys, so a couple of quick disclaimers before we get into it. Firstly, there will be spoilers today. This movie is almost 40 years old. And secondly, you'll find all my other reviews of Stephen King adaptations in my Stephen King playlist. My long-term goal is to review every single King adaptation, even the non-horror ones, even the TV show ones. But it's going to be a long journey. It's probably going to take years, and I still want to do lots of other reviews in between the King ones. Now, this is based on a short story called Trucks, which was included in King's Night Shift collection. There are two adaptations for Trucks. The first is this one, Maximum Overdrive from the 80s, and the other one is a TV movie that was actually called Trucks that came out in the 90s. And I've already reviewed the 90s one because I'm reviewing these films slightly out of sequence because it took me a while to get a disc for Maximum Overdrive. So if you don't know the plot for this, it's very, very simple. A bunch of people get trapped at a truck stop on a freeway because all the local cars and trucks and machines have just taken on a life of their own and decide to kill anybody who comes across their path. So all these people seek safe haven in the truck stop, and they've got to try and find a way out of their situation. Now, I didn't like the explanation for why the trucks rise up in the 90s version. So in that one, it turned out that the army had accidentally released some kind of pathogen that goes through the air and gets into the engines of all the vehicles, and that's what makes them turn murderous. But that's just complete bunkum, as my dad might have said when he was still alive. That was one of his favourite words, bunkum. The explanation in Maximum Overdrive is not much better. So in this one, there's a comet flying past the Earth. It's going to take 8 days to get out of the Earth's range, but in that time it'll send down these alpha rays or gamma rays, and they will get into the machines and cause them to rise up and go do-laddie. It's slightly more believable than the army thing, but not by much. And in all honesty, I would have just left all explanation out of this story because you'd never come up with a good one, so why bother? And given that King did not have an explanation in his original short story, I have to wonder if the comet thing in this film was some kind of studio mandate, because King himself, who is the director of this, he's kind of a little bit apologetic about it. He kind of just shunts it in at the top of the film with a little bit of writing, and then I don't think you ever hear anything about that again for the rest of the film. It's literally like people above him decided, you've got to put this in there so people aren't going to be asking the question all the way through the movie. But just unnecessary as far as I'm concerned. I mean, can you imagine if the Spielberg film Duel had an explanation for the truck driver's rampage? That's a similar sort of story insofar as you've got this truck that's deciding to kill for no reason, albeit in that story there is a driver in the truck. But can you just picture if they'd shunted a quick scene of explanation in just before the end credits, maybe have a sheriff talking to the good guy saying, oh, well, it turns out that the truck driver, his wife has got cancer and that's why he's gone a little bit crazy. Or, so, it turns out you actually know the truck driver. He was your employee back in 1975, and, well, let's just say he wasn't happy that you didn't give him his Christmas bonus that year. Now, I've just come up with these on the fly, but there's no explanation you could have given to that truck driver which would have made that film any better. And I kind of feel the same way about Trucks. But like I said, I do suspect it was like a studio mandate thing, although maybe I'm being a little bit too much of a King fanboy here. Maybe he just made an error with this one and just included a little bit too much plot detail. One thing I'll say about the 90s one is that it is at least a horror movie by definition. I mean, it doesn't have great characters and it doesn't adapt the material particularly well, but it is at least a horror film, whereas Maximum Overdrive is more like a black comedy for the majority of it. I'm not even sure that King backed himself to make a horror film out of this. And the main problem with the original short is that it is kind of lacking in content. I mean, there's not a lot there. So anytime you try and bring the truck story to the big screen, you're always going to have that problem of the big void that pops up in the middle of the movie when when you've got characters in the truck stop not doing anything, and you've also got trucks outside not doing anything, you can't starve these characters out because there's going to be lots of food. It's a truck stop, and what are the vehicles going to do apart from just charge into the truck stop? But if they do that, then the end game has begun, and you don't want to do that too quickly. Now, King does try and fill the void with a couple of ploys. So he has a few people on little side adventures elsewhere. He's got this little kid on a bike running around, and there's a married couple in a car who were on the freeway for some of the film, and then they join up with the main plot. And something else that King does is make it so that in this version it's not just vehicles that have gone crazy, it's all the machines in the world. It's hairdryers, it's lawnmowers, it's anything you can think of. So this means he can spend a bit more time showing things other than vehicles attacking people. I'll tell you what I would have done with the story, though. So I would have had the first half an hour playing out like a homage to Steven Spielberg's Duel. I would have had just one car on the freeway being attacked by one driverless truck, and there would have been like a game of cat and mouse for a while, but eventually the car would have won out and the truck would have gone over a cliff or whatever. Yay for the people in the car. And then they would have driven triumphantly into a truck stop, and then they would have noticed that there's 10 more murderous looking trucks all around them, and the people in the truck stop are saying, "Quick, run in here before you get killed." And that's when you could begin adapting the actual material of the short story. But the advantage to doing it this way is that you would then only have an hour to kill rather than an hour and a half. And I think then that it would be a bit more manageable. Another thing that King does to fill up a little bit of screen time is this really unnecessary cameo that he does at the start, which I absolutely cannot stand. So the first thing you see in this is King himself playing a passerby on the street, approaching the camera. His face is covering most of the screen, and there's a cash machine that's it's put writing on the screen that says, "You are an asshole, whatever." And King turns to his wife off camera and says, "Hey, honey, this machine just called me an asshole." And he's wearing these stupid glasses, and I'm just thinking, Stephen, this is not what directors do at the start of a movie. You are not going to see Oliver Stone, James Wan, Martin Scorsese appearing at the top end of their films making an absolute idiot of themselves because they just desperately want to be seen in their own movie. That's not how this works. This scene is genuinely awful, and it reminds me a little bit of when directors will stick on a kind of forward introduction to their new Blu-ray releases. So sometimes now, when a new 4K comes out, a new version of a film, the director might record a little bit of an interview clip for it and stick it on the front of the film, but actually on the film. They won't just dump it in the extras section where it's not going to cause any harm. They'll put it on the front of the film, and it's irritating as hell. So you could end up with somebody like James Cameron coming on and saying, "Hey, welcome to my new 16K release of Aliens, and I hope you enjoy what we managed to do with the film. It looks really great now, and because we're shooting in 16K now, you can actually feel my hand through the screen, and I actually spent 10 years designing this tech, and I'm going to spend the next 10 adapting my entire back catalogue so that I can sell loads of old movies for $15 a time. Here, feel my hand again. Feel the Rolex." Sorry, went off on one there. Had King himself done a forward introduction to Maximum Overdrive, yes, it would have been cheesy and unnecessary, but it still would have been preferable to him making an idiot of himself by a cash machine. You know, if King had come on and just said, "Hi, I'm Stephen King, and a few years ago I wrote a short story called Trucks. Well, now you're about to watch the movie version, so fasten your seatbelt and let's go for a ride. And remember, this could never happen in real life, so don't worry." That would have been pointless, but still better than him doing what he does, which is hugely uncomfortable. It's like he just desperately wanted to show that he can be self-deprecating by having this cash machine call him a dick, and he's going to say nothing in response. He's just going to go, "Oh." But you know what? I would assume that he is a modest guy in real life. I would assume that he's self-deprecating. I would assume that he's just nice. I don't need him to tell me that he's nice. The only notable actor in this is Emilio Estevez, who's playing the leading man. I really like Estevez as an actor, albeit I've not seen him in anything since the 90s, I don't think. But I'll always have a huge amount of respect for him because of his work in things like Young Guns and Judgment Night. Here he's playing a young puppy dog in his early 20s who's a bit down on his luck. He's having to work at this truck stop for presumably a very low wage, and he absolutely hates it. His manager treats him like crap. But luckily, there's a truck apocalypse on the horizon, so Estevez's character will get the chance to show the world what a true man he actually is. And also, there's something of a cutie pie about to come into the truck stop, who is more concerned with getting laid than dealing with the problem of the truck. So that's another piece of luck about to come Estevez's way. His romance with the girl in this is probably the only bit of character work that you see, although it kind of runs into a dead end when the two sleep with each other about halfway through, because after that there's just nowhere for them to go at that point. They are just unofficially together, I suppose. Most of the other characters are pretty silly. They're just stereotypes, or there's just no work being done on them. There's one guy who's like a pervert traveling salesman, and this guy just can't be killed quickly enough. King could have killed him in the prologue. It still wouldn't have been soon enough for me. It should have been done at the script stage. And there's also the owner of the truck stop, who is just a complete dick, albeit he does provide a moment of high amusement when it turns out that he's got this cache of weapons hidden in this basement room underneath the truck stop. He's got rocket launchers in there, he's got assault rifles, and just the fact that this has been written into the script is another sign that King is not taking this film very seriously. Even in gun-crazy America, I can't imagine there is a truck stop out there with a room full of weapons that would make Arnold Schwarzenegger blush. It's just not going to happen. Although I really did like it when the truck stop owner runs outside with a rocket launcher and just fires this thing at one of the trucks. Some of the people on his own side have got to duck out of the way so the rocket can fly over their heads and hit the truck. Even if this guy is intended to be some kind of weapons enthusiast on the side of his job as a truck stop manager, he would know not to fire a weapon in these circumstances. He would read like weapons magazines and things. He would know his stuff. He wouldn't just take risks like this. It's just utterly crazy. The soundtrack is better than the characters, although I've got mixed feelings about the soundtrack because it's entirely been done by AC/DC. I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that this was a band that King was really into at one point, but there's no variety to it. It's the same sort of dad rock thing that's playing from start to end, regardless of what scene is happening. It just made me picture this movie playing in a ranch house above the bar, but you can't hear the dialogue because AC/DC is playing on the speakers. The music in this just gave me that kind of feel. Overall, this movie was kind of lame. A few amusing bits and pieces here and there, usually when random machines were just attacking people, but as a movie it doesn't really hold up. I'm at a little bit of a loss to decide which one I prefer out of this and the TV version from the 90s, but ultimately I don't think I will be watching either of them again, though in the case of this one I now own a DVD for it. But look, on the whole, this film is not so much maximum overdrive as it is minimum underdrive. That makes no sense. Just find a way to cut that last bit out, okay? So here is that copy of the movie I was just briefly talking about. It cost me £6, which I guess isn't too bad given the fact that I don't like it. It would have hurt a lot more if that price had been north of 10. But this is just going to end up in my cupboard. It will never get watched again, probably. At some point in the future I will require the space for better films and I'll end up chucking this out. But for now, it can stay in my house. There's no features on this, by the way, if you're ever thinking of buying it yourself, but I didn't care about that. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out how I'm going to score this. So we've got 1, 2 bloody axes out of 5. Now, I think I gave Trucks 3, the 90s one. So maybe I do prefer the 90s one just because it is a horror movie. But certainly before I sat down to record this review, I did think that the films were kind of similar in quality or lack of quality. But you know what? I'm just happy to be moving on from Trucks adaptations. Now, this is the end of the review, but this is one of those days where we do have a little bit of a reading update. So I've just finished The Gunslinger, which is my 9th Stephen King book, as I slowly move through his back catalogue, mostly in the order in which the books were released. I kind of enjoyed this. It was definitely better than Cujo, which is the one I read before this, though I'm still only going to give this like a 3 out of 5. I did like the design of the fantasy setting, the way that it's kind of half Western, half fantasy, and I did enjoy a lot of the scrapes that Roland the Gunslinger gets himself into, and on a technical level this book is amazing. It's so well written. King writes this world so well. On the flip side, I didn't like the backstory, the flashback scenes, and there's quite a few of them in this book. I was just bored by all of that. I did not care about this character's backstory. So every time Roland sits down at a campfire and you know you're going to get a backstory chapter, I was like, oh god, here we go again. But everything happening in the present moment was really good, and I'm kind of looking forward to part 2, but because I'm taking King's book in the order that they were released, it might be a while before I get to part 2. But I don't think I'm going to have trouble remembering what happened in this part 1. Now, I'm taking a little bit of a break from King to go back to the Alien books. I'm going to be reading the Alien Covenant novelisation next. So I've just started it, and it's a very gripping book to start off with this. In fact, just to show you how gripping it is, I'm going to read you the very first page so you can see just how this book really pulls you in. So here we go, page 1. It wasn't dreaming. It did not have the capability. The omission wasn't intentional, not deliberate. This was simply a known consequence of its creation. Where it was concerned, the intention was that there should be no surprises. In the absence of an unconscious consciousness, there could be no abstract conceptualization. The speculative information dump necessary to allow for dreaming was absent. Yet there was something. Difficult to define. Ultimately, only it could define its own state of non-being. Only it could understand what it did not know, did not see, did not feel. In the absence of dreaming, there was also no pain, there was no joy, there was no hyperfractionated percentages of either. There was only the ongoing state of not quite nothingness, of almost being. Then, a sensation leading to a thought, analysis, possible visual perception, a requirement for auxiliary neural stimulation. I'm sure eventually this book will kick into gear, but this is bollocks so far. What is going on page 1? I think it's something to do with an android. Now, this one is done by Alan Dean Foster, who did the original trilogy of Alien novelizations, which are all really good. So I know this book is going to pick up. Although from memory, I think he kicks off a lot of those other novelizations with random uppity shit for the first few pages, or the first chapter or whatever. And this is really going overboard. So we'll see how I get on with Alien Covenant, but not the most positive of starts. Right, enough of all that. I will say goodbye for now. Thank you for joining me for my review of Maximum Overdrive, and I'll catch you all again next time. My next review is going to be a return to the early 70s with a film that I actually got the Blu-ray for Christmas. So until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.